Dear Heavenly Father, we thank Thee for this opportunity that we have to be in class, and we ask Thee to help us learn and help the teacher teach us what we need to know for this week's assignments. And please help us with all of our classes and everything we do. And please help us stay true, and we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. All right, you guys. Let's see, admitting a couple more people from our waiting room here. All right, well, we have an exam this week. Congrats on making it this far into our course. Let me share my screen. All right, so our week 5 announcement, as in previous weeks, we have a video with a walkthrough of last week's assignment. And then if you want help getting started, here's another video to help you get started on this week's assignment. These links don't work. So if you right click on these and hit copy link address, you can paste it into a new tab, and then hopefully they'll work, okay? It looks like that worked. But then same with this, if you want to see the practice exam, just right click on this, hit copy link address, open it up in a new tab, and you'll be able to see our practice exam, okay? But first, before we go into this, we will go into this today. I'll answer any questions that you guys have about it, but I wanted to cover some chapter 5 content first to kind of get us up to speed, because a lot of this exam will come from chapter 5. So please don't take the exam without finishing your week's work first, okay? Before you take your exam, you should do all the reading and all the assignments, peer review discussion board, submitting assignments, everything before you go and do your exam. So let's dive into week 5. Move my stuff around here. Okay, chapter 5, variables and arithmetic. So declaring a variable, we talked about last week, how to declare a variable. When you declare a variable, you are telling a computer to save a space in memory for that variable. So if I have a piece of data that I want to use at a later point in time, I can use the keyword var, short for variable, to declare a variable. Now, these 2 lines of code are lines of code, despite the bullet point here. But if I was going to go to my text editor and just type in var space x semicolon, that is a valid line of code that will allocate a space in memory for this variable. And if I want to access that point in memory, all I have to do is just type in the letter x, because that's the name of my variable, and I can access that location in memory. Now, written like this, I have not put anything in that place in memory yet. Our computer basically like bought a dresser so that we can like put something into that space, but there's nothing in the dresser yet. All right. If I want to allocate several spaces in memory at one time, then I can just use a comma and say var y, comma z, and I can create several allocated spaces in memory at once if I want to. This isn't necessarily super common, but it is valid JavaScript code, and there's nothing wrong with it. So variable types. There are 5 primary variable types in JavaScript. Okay, there's a Boolean, which stores a true or false value. So if I was going to store a Boolean variable, I could just say var x equals true. And I could look at that. Let me pull up. We don't care about Python. So I'm just going to come in here into chapter 5, and I'm going to make a new file. And I'm going to call this temp.html. And then I have this empty HTML file. I'm going to go ahead and type an exclamation mark and hit tab to generate my little HTML document. And then in the head tag, I'm going to put a script tag where I can put my JavaScript. All right. And in here, I can type in any JavaScript I want to. So if I typed in var x, like we saw there, this is valid JavaScript code, and it would assign that space in memory. And if I wanted to assign this a Boolean value, I would just have to say, oops, true. Var x equals true. And this is valid JavaScript code. If I wanted to declare a variable that was false, then I could go like that. Okay, these are both Boolean variables. Okay, another one is a number with or without a decimal point. Okay, some languages are picky about integers and floating point numbers. JavaScript isn't. Okay, so if I just declare a number, I can just come into here and say var age equals 36. Or if you're like a baby who like counts months or something like that, I could say var baby age equals 1.4 if they were like 15 months old, okay, or 16 months old. So we can do this. All right, I have my two Boolean data types, two number data types, and at any point I can use any one of these variables. So we've already looked at the alert function, which I encourage you not to use because generally people don't like pop-ups in their browsers. But for right now, let's go ahead and just try alerting one of these variables. Okay, so I'm going to copy this path, come over to my browser, open this up, and it says this page says 36. Okay, just popped up that piece of data on the screen. Notice the user's never going to know that I called this age as the variable. The user doesn't care what it's called. The user cares about the data that's here. And that's all I care about here. When I say alert age, I'm saying I don't care what the variable is actually called. This is just how I access this piece of data to display to the user. Okay. Let's look at another one. So we have a string. Last week, you guys dealt with lots of strings, doing all that scripture concatenation stuff. Those were all strings. And it's just a string of text, and you have it in quotation marks. So if I said var scripture equals, and then I have, and it came to pass, okay, that's a string. All right. Now, one thing that's kind of confusing is that I could also have var age string equals 36. Okay. Now, I don't have to say string right here. I could say age word or anything, or just leave it as, you know, some age. I could call this anything I wanted to, but because this is in quotation marks, it is a string. Even though it's the number 36, it is a string. So if I went and I tried to do like some arithmetic with this, and I said alert sum age times 16, this could throw errors because sum age is a string, and it won't know what to do with this arithmetic symbol when I'm trying to multiply by 16. Whereas if I just did age right here, then it would be like, oh, age is 36, and I can easily multiply 36 by 16 because of those different data types. Okay. Next one, we have a function. A part of a program created using the keyword function. All right, this is a very condensed function right here. If I was going to actually write a function in here, it would look like this. Have a function, that keyword, and then I'd have a function name. Maybe it is alert age function. And then I would have these opening and closing curly braces to say what I want to do inside of that function. And then in here, I could say var age equals 20 and alert age. Okay. And then when this function gets called, it would go ahead and declare this variable age and alert that to the user. That's a function data type. And then our last one here, we have an object. An object, we're not going to go into these for like 2 more months. Okay. But I could have var ages equals, and I'd have 20 and 36 and 42 and 16 and 4. Okay. And so I can have a collection of data in one variable. And we'll learn how to deal with arrays and objects and things later on. But it's important to know that they exist as a data type in JavaScript. All right, moving on. So assigning variables, we just looked at all of these except for this object right here. So var student, notice the curly brace here, that's to declare an object. And these are just basically what we call key value pairs. So I have a key called name, and then I have the value of it is Nathan, and is old is false, and likes to sing is true. So I have an object here that basically has 3 variables in it. I have a name, which is a string, and then I have 2 Boolean variables, is old and likes to sing. Okay. And then var empty, we looked at this too when we just said var x semicolon and we didn't assign it anything. That is an undefined variable. We don't know what data type it is. So yeah, any questions on assigning variables in JavaScript? Okay. Well, then let's keep going. Desk checks. So you'll learn about desk checks this week if you have not already. This is a screenshot from your book. But basically, it is a table to show you the state a variable is in. And if you want to think about it, as a way, we talked about a dresser. As soon as you say var x, it's like all of a sudden your computer bought a dresser to like put data into, okay? And the dresser is going to be empty until you use this equals sign and say var x equals something. And then you put that 7 into your dresser, so to speak. All right, well, a desk check kind of helps you see what you put into that dresser and what you take out of that dresser. So our first line of code here says var x equals 7. And so we'd write a 7 in this box underneath x. And then var y equals -3. We put a -3 there. And then var a equals x. Well, x had 7 in there. And so if I assign a the value of x, then a also gets 7. And then if I say x equals 4, then all of a sudden x doesn't have 7 anymore. I took one shirt out of my dresser and I put a different one in there. And now x has the value of 4. All right, and if I ever wanted to get that 7 out of x again, I couldn't. It's gone. I assigned it 4, and that's it. Okay, but that's what our desk checks are for. It's helpful to see a history of your variables and where they end up at the end of a program. Because just looking at this, it kind of takes practice to be like, oh yeah, x is 7, y is -3, a is going to be 7 because x was 7, and so forth. All right, so swapping values between variables. So this is not a super common thing. This is just to help you guys understand how the allocation of memory goes and what you would have to do if you wanted to like trade the values between two variables. Var a equals 20, b equals 20, or sorry, a equals 10, b equals 20. And if I wanted to say, a equals b and b equals a, JavaScript is not a smart enough language to be able to like handle that process and swap them both. Because if we look back over here, as soon as I assign x a different value, I can't get that 7 back. I can only have one value stored in these locations in memory in a computer. And so once it's gone, it's gone. And so right here, we declare a third variable. Just for a sec, we're going to say var swap equals a. So that when we assign a the value of b, which is 20, that 10 would be gone, okay? But we save that 10 in the variable swap, and then we can assign swap to b, effectively swapping the values of a and b. At the end of this, a would be 20 and b would be 10. Here's our desk check. All right, a started off as 10, b started off as 20, swap started off and ended as 10. We never changed swap, okay? But then on the fourth line of code, we said a equals b, which is 20, okay? And that took 10 out of a. And then b equals swap, which was 10. And now b got the value of swap, which got it from a. And this is where our program ends up. Okay. If anyone has any questions at any point, feel free to stop me. I know I'm going fast for two reasons. This is all in your book, and also because I want to cover some exam stuff today. I want to write some programs with you. So, but do you guys have any questions on this?
I do have one question. So with the swapping thing, so does that just work? Like we're not assigning, oh my goodness, it's really funny how you have to assign variables, right? And then when you get to the a equals b and b equals swap, then it just knows already that a is the variable we're using.
So technically right here on our fifth line of code, b has no idea that it's getting a value from a, and it doesn't care. All it cares about is what is in swap. Okay, we know that we assigned the value of a to swap. And so effectively, if I wanted to swap b's and a's variables or values, I would have to do this. But the code doesn't care that a used to be 10 and that b is going to get 10. It doesn't care.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
Not a question, but can I just say, I did my reading this morning and you explain it way better than our textbook does.
I'm glad. Thanks, Carolyn. All right, it helps that I can just like talk and ramble while moving a mouse. It helps. All right, so we just learned how to assign variables and a little bit about how memory allocation works. You can only ever have like one thing in a space in memory. And if you assign it something else, that other thing's gone. All right, now let's change gears a little bit and let's talk about arithmetic. All right, this will bring us right back to like elementary school story questions for the rest of the semester. When it's like, oh, you have these two people and their age is like this and this and somebody's double that, what's the total? You know, that's like a lot of the stuff that we're gonna be doing the rest of the semester. But in code, so it's really cool and I'm really excited for you guys. But here are the JavaScript arithmetic operators. If you know any other programming languages, you will see that these are very similar across the board. But here are the operators that we can work with in JavaScript. We have this. It is a dash on your keyboard. So let's see. To the left of the equal sign, to the right of a 0 if you're on a standard keyboard for the English language, I guess. So that's the negation operator. The algebraic expression is, again, just dash R. And the JavaScript expression, if I wanted to write that in JavaScript, all I have to do is just put that negative sign or hyphen or dash in front of a variable, and it will negate it. All right. So if I have a positive value, it'll just make it a negative. Next one, multiplication and division. Pretty straightforward. These look almost exactly like they do in regular algebra, except our asterisk here isn't used in algebra. We usually just use a dot or just smack two variables right next to each other. That does not work in JavaScript. If you try that, you'll get a big error, because here's what JavaScript will try to do. So I have age and I have baby age. Okay, let's say I wanted to multiply these together. Now in JavaScript, I could just say age, baby age. Done. You know, this would work in algebra. Now, the reason why this doesn't work in JavaScript is because this is going to try to find a variable called age, baby age. Okay, it's going to look for like one variable. It's not smart enough to be like, oh, he has these two variables and he wants to multiply them. No, instead it's like you have to put that asterisk in there if you want to multiply them, because it's not smart enough to be like, oh, I know that he had two variables and he wants to like multiply them. Okay, so this doesn't work in JavaScript, even though it does work in algebra. Division, same as algebra. Modulus. Anybody know what modulus is or what it does?
It returns the remainder of a division.
Yeah. So cool little trick for you guys. Let's say I wanted to run this in my browser. Okay, which we already did, I think. Yep, still up. I'm going to hit F12, and I'm going to come over to my sources. We talked a little bit about this last week, but I'm going to put well, you know what? Let's just worry about modulus first. So let's say I have 10 divided by 3. Okay, this is a little JavaScript compiler, if you will. It's not really compiling, it's just rendering your JavaScript code. But I can run it here. If I say alert 5, it runs that code and it has that alert. Okay, so you can just open up your developer tools, right click, hit inspect in the page, and click on console, and you can test anything you want here. We're going to talk a lot about this with your exam, because you're allowed to use this on your exam, and it'll really help you if you do use it on your exam. Now, let's do 10 modulus 3. Notice it says 1. Okay, what modulus does is it counts how many times 3 goes into 10, which is 3, but it doesn't care about the 3. It only cares that there's 1 left over. Okay, so 10 divided by 3 is 3.3, which means 3 goes into 10 fully 3 times, and then there's that 1 left over. So if I have 10 modulus 2, we get 0, because 2 evenly goes into 10, and that's all it cares about. There's nothing left over. If I have 10 modulus 4, okay, 4, 8, and there's 2 left over between 8 and 10. Okay, and so if I, for example, wanted to check to see if a number was even, all right, I could just say 61 modulus 2. And if whatever number I'm working with, modulus 2, if it returns a 1, then it's odd. If it returns a 0, then it's even. Okay, so modulus always returns our remainder. All right, that's what modulus does. All right, next up we have addition and subtraction, same as algebra. And then we have our assignment operator. Okay, now this assignment operator is a little bit confusing because in algebra we're used to like solving for a variable. All right, we look at an assignment operator as having like equivalencies, you know, and so we'll say x equals 2 plus y or something like that, and you have to solve for y or solve for x or something like that. That's not how it is in JavaScript. JavaScript, all you're doing with it is saying you're assigning a value. So in here, I can say age equals 36, baby age equals 1.4. There isn't any like like type of equivalency. I couldn't say like, oh, x equals 2 times age, and then we like solve for x. You know, instead we're just saying, okay, 2 times 36 is 72. We'll assign that to x, and that's what x's new value is going to be. All right, and I could assign this anything. I could say x all of a sudden equals Jeanette. Whoops. Okay, and that's valid. All right, even though x used to be a Boolean, I could be like, you know what? I actually want to make that a string, and I can do that in JavaScript. There's a lot of languages you couldn't do that with, but you can in JavaScript. Okay, so x is our, or this equal sign is just an assignment operator. It's not worrying about equivalencies or anything like that. It's just when you want to assign a value to a variable, you do. All right, operator precedence. So this is really important. Same thing in algebra, you have the order of operations. Okay, if I have, for example, you know, like 2 plus 3 times 4, okay? If we didn't have an order of operations to worry about, we'd have 2 plus 3 equals 5 times 4 equals 20, okay? This isn't gonna equal 20 though. I can check this just by putting this in an alert box and running it. I'm back over here, hit refresh, and it says 14. That is not 20. Here's why, because of the order of operations. Multiplication always comes before addition. So 3 times 4 takes place first, which is 12, and then we add 2 on top, instead of saying 2 plus 3 equals 5 times 4, okay? So we have the order of operations in JavaScript, very similarly to how we do in algebra. In algebra, parentheses always come first too, which is really nice, okay? And then we have negation. After that, multiplication, division, and modulus all share the same order of precedence. Same with addition and subtraction, they have the same order of precedence. So if I have something like, let me take this alert off real quick. So if I have something like plus 6 minus 2 plus 17, all it cares about is that this happens first, okay? So that would end up looking like 2 plus 12 plus all of that, okay? Because this multiplication will take place first, and then it'll just go from left to right, all right? Same thing with multiplication, division, and modulus. If I say 2 times 3 divided by 6 modulus 1, you know, all these share the same level of precedence, so it's just going to go from left to right. All right. Now, if all of a sudden I decided to put parentheses here, all right, if we look here, parentheses have a higher level of precedence than the multiplication does, or the division, or the modulus. So this would take place first, which would land us at 2 times 0.5 modulus 1, okay? And then we just go from left to right. We do 2 times 0.5, would be 1, modulus 1, 1 goes into 1 evenly once, which would land us at 0, okay? And so this is really similar to just basic algebra, you know, where you just kind of break things down step by step based on their level of precedence or their order of operations. Any questions about this? Okay, you guys have access to these slides and to this link. I put this link in here in case you wanted a little refresher or you wanted to practice. The same way that I did here in the browser with my console, where I was like, oh, what would this be? You know, that link has a little try it editor, and you can do the same thing, and you can like run things and test them. So, all right, next up, algebra to JavaScript. Okay, so you guys are going to have to do this a lot. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but you will take an algebraic expression and convert it to JavaScript. Okay, now I'm not super good at this. I always get numerators mixed up with denominators in the order of where I put the slash for the division. And sometimes it's a little bit trial and error for me because I'm no mathematician. But it's a pretty simple rule of thumb once you get used to it, okay? So numerators always come before the denominator when you're doing, when we have our forward slash for our division, okay? And we're just kind of gonna space things out. So if I look at this and I see I, and then I have these parentheses and then this fraction. In algebra, I know that these are all being multiplied, okay? Well, in JavaScript, I have to actually put that asterisk there. So I say I times, and then I have my parentheses, and then 1 plus a divided by n. Now, if I wanted to, I could also put a divided by n into parentheses. There would be nothing wrong with that. If I said I times, what was it? 1 plus a divided by n, and those were all in parentheses. And then we had times y divided by n, y divided by n, okay? Now, here's our expression. If I wanted to add parentheses right here, that's totally cool. Because I'm like, hey, that's a fraction. That division has to take place before we add a 1 on. But because of order of operations, this is going to happen first anyways, because division happens before addition happens. So I wouldn't have to put anything there. Now, these parentheses, on the other hand, are absolutely critical. Because if I took these off, then now y will get multiplied by all of this first, and then divided by n. Okay, so these parentheses would be really, really important. Now, very rarely you can have more. You can't really ever have too many parentheses. Okay, if I put parentheses right there, sweet. It's not going to render this any differently. Okay, because of order of operations, it'll do the exact same thing. But if I want that extra layer of parentheses there to make sure that, you know, this multiplication happens first, that's totally cool. You know, if I wanted to put parentheses on this whole thing again, that's totally cool. You know, whatever makes sense to you, you can't go wrong just adding more parentheses. That's totally fine. Okay, let's look at our next one. Let's actually.
So I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in JavaScript, do they have assigned variables that so you have something like pi or something like e or something like, do you have to declare those beforehand, like what you want those to equal, or are they already put in the system?
So JavaScript has a really big object called math. Okay, we talked about a data type called an object earlier, and it had a name, is old, and likes to sing. Okay, well, there's an object built into JavaScript very similar to document. Okay, when we looked at document last week, look at all this stuff inside of here. Document is an object. So if I want to see document.title, it would print up this inside of this title. Okay, well, there's another object built in JavaScript called math, capital M, and if I say math dot, you can see there's all this stuff in here. Okay, there is e, there's cosine, there's pi. You know, these ones up here are showing our constants that never change, and then we have all these functions down here.
So would you have to type in like math dot that for instead of like?
Yes. Yeah.
Would
so
more often would you do it like you have your variable like variable x equals math dot whatever, and then you're able to just chuck that in, or would you just in the thing write it?
So if I wanted to, I could say var pi equals math dot pi.
Yeah.
Okay, and that'd be just fine. And then I could say, you know, circumference equals radius times pi. Anyways, so if I had like 5 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, and I could use that.
Yeah.
Whoops, there we go. Okay, and that'd be just fine. I see this very rarely. Usually
Okay.
you just see that instead.
You just see it put in.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess if you're going to be using something over and over and over and over and over again, maybe you would want a simplified variable just to make it easier to look at. But that, I feel like that'd be pretty rare.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah, great question. Okay, so let's look at this right here. Okay, I just covered up our solution. We'll work through this together. First things first, usually I would want to declare x first. Okay, I guess just because I like to go from left to right. So I'd say var x to declare it, and then I say equals. And then right here, anytime I have a fraction, I usually make some parentheses. Okay, so I'll make my parentheses for this whole fraction, 7 over 2 times r plus 13. Okay, and then in here I'll say 7 divided by, and then in here I see that this is going to be 2 times, and I have more parentheses. And so I'm going to put a second set of parentheses for my denominator to make sure that this math takes place before it's divided by 7. Okay. So in here I'd say 2 times, and then there's more parentheses for the r plus 13, and that I can just copy across the board. Okay. So I split this up. I have var x equals 7 divided by, and then to make sure that my denominator math happens first, I just put it in parentheses to force this 2 to be multiplied by r plus 13 first. Otherwise, if this wasn't here, then we'd say 7 divided by 2, 3.5 times that. Okay, and that's not what our expression is saying. Okay, so we have the first chunk done. Var x equals 7 divided by 2 times r plus 13. Now that that's all done, I'm just going to say minus, and then I'm going to put parentheses again. And this is probably more just for me than anyone, because this math 3 times a plus bc will happen. But I'm going to put parentheses there just to make it clear for me to see. So I'm going to say 3, and then I have to put a times there. I have to put an asterisk because it won't just multiply if I put it up against some parentheses. So I say 3 times, and then I'll go ahead and put some more parentheses, a plus b times c, semicolon. Okay. If I wanted to, I could put parentheses here, and that would work just fine. But this one was simple enough for me. I was like, oh yeah, b times c will happen first, and then we'll add a on top, just like this is saying here. And then we'll multiply that by 3, and this whole value will be subtracted from this after all the math takes place. Okay. All right, any questions on how I did that? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. It's easy to make mistakes. I would recommend, checking your work. And some of these are kind of hard to check your work with, but if you just plug in numbers into these things, you say R is 2, A is 3, B is 4, and C is 5, or something like that, then you can actually see what X is. And then once you put it in a JavaScript, then you can see what X will be again, if you just plug in those numbers again. So I would recommend doing that as you're starting to get practice with this. When I first took cit160, it had been a really, really long time since I had worried about algebra. So, all right. Okay, Celsius to Fahrenheit example. Let's see here. So we have the function, or the expression, 9/5 times C plus 32. So we're assuming that we have a Celsius value, and we're going to convert this Celsius value to Fahrenheit. Now, I could Google this. If I just said Celsius to Fahrenheit, it'll show us the expression right here. Okay, we have degrees in Celsius times 9/5 plus 32. And that's the same thing that we're showing right here. We have degrees in Celsius times 9/5 plus 32. Okay, so in this program right here, we have document.getElement by ID Celsius input box dot value. So we'll get a value from a user, whatever number they type in, and this will always return a string. So you can see our desk check down here. It shows text as the number 20 that the user typed in quotation marks as a string. And then we say parse float. This converts a string into a floating point number. So it's just a number that allows a decimal point. So if we did parse float on text, then C would just be the number 20 with no quotation marks. And then it kind of broke up our arithmetic a little bit here. It said C times 9 would be like 180, and then C times 9 divided by 5, it would show what that would be. And then we'd add 32 to get F. And then we go ahead and display that on the page. So I think I have this written up somewhere. Celsius to Fahrenheit, I do. Okay, so notice I have my defining table here. Input at temperature in Celsius, output temperature converted to Fahrenheit, and then the processing that takes place. Now, very frequently, when I get a problem like this, instead of having something vague and blatantly obvious like that, I would actually Google it and then copy this guy and then paste it. Okay, and so I would just have, okay, I have C times 9/5 plus 32 equals a Fahrenheit temperature, and I put that in there. So let's look at our HTML real quick. Enter temperature in Celsius. We have an input box, has a unique ID, have a button that calls our function Celsius to Fahrenheit, and then we have a div called FahrenDiv or Fahrenheit div, where we're going to output something to the user. All right, so in here, we read our Celsius temperature from the user, so this would be our input, and then we have our processing, and then we have our output. Okay, and so let's actually run this. I'm going to copy the path, go to my browser, paste it, enter temperature in Celsius, input button, I'm going to say 50 degrees Celsius, well, let's say like 15 degrees Celsius. Convert, and this popped up on the page, 59. A lot better than an alert box, okay? And I would check this, all right? I would say, okay, 15 degrees Celsius, good. It means we did our program right. I would always check it. Sometimes when you're in an exam setting, you can't use your browser, which means you can't use Google, so you couldn't do that here. But anytime you're just like working on the side or working on assignments, I would always check. Okay, so I'm going to open up my developer tools, sources, and I'm going to put a breakpoint right here, and we can see what's happening. Open this up a bit, and I'm going to put 6 in here instead. I'm going to hit convert, and get on by ID. If I highlight this whole thing, you can see that it found an input, an HTML input, and you can see on the left-hand side that it's like highlighting it right now. See how it's blue over there? And that has that little tooltip. And so it's like, hey, I found this input. Here's the ID that I found, the Celsius input box. And then down here, we have a value. Notice the string. Okay, even I typed in just the number 6, it's showing up as a string. And so as soon as I hit F10, it will assign that number 6 to text. Okay, parse float, we have a nice function here. It recognizes this as a function that's built into JavaScript, and it'll take that text and convert it to a number. So you can see now C is a number that we can do math with. All right. Order of operations says that these things will happen first. From left to right, we'll get 10.8, and then plus 32, we'll get 42.8. If I hit F10, that'll be assigned to F, and then we say find the FahrenDiv and assign F to the inner HTML of it. That's just a div right underneath our button. So if I hit F8, that'll let it go, and we get that 42.8 that shows up there. All right. What time did our class start today? I always forget. We have 20 minutes left. It was 11:30. All right. Let's see. Assignment operators. These are just some shortcuts. And so if ever you see something like, we'll say x equals 2, and we have like an alert that says x times, well, let's see here. I'm not doing alert. If I say like var y times equals x, here I'll declare y first. I'll say y equals 3 and y times equals x. So what this is doing, x equals 2, y equals 3. I'm currently reassigning a value to y, and this is just a shortcut for me saying y equals y times x. Okay. Anytime you have one of these shortcuts, whether it's plus equals, minus equals, times equals, modulus equals, you're saying, hey, I'm going to assign it its own value and then plus some arithmetic. So if we said y minus equals x, then it would just be y equals y minus x. Okay, these are just shortcuts. If you never wanted to code them, you'd never have to. You do have to know what they do, and you'll be asked about them on your exam, but it's just a shortcut, and it's the exact same thing. It will do the exact same thing as this line of code beneath them. Let's see here. Next one, increment and decrement. So these are really important. I would just encourage you to look in your book for them. They're relatively simple. If I had var z equals 1, and then I say z plus plus, that would be 2. It's just going to add 1 to z. So it would be the same thing as saying z equals z 1. It'd be the same thing as saying z plus equals 1. And yeah, so these 3 lines of code will all do the exact same thing. They're all synonymous with each other. So you're like, well, why would we do it? Well, for whatever reason in programming, you very frequently have to increment a value by 1. And this makes it very easy to do it quickly. So there is a post-increment operator and a pre-increment operator. And this will just change the order at which things are done. And I would encourage you to look at your desk checks to see those. And we'll also look at an example here in a minute for our exam prep. The math object we already looked at. It's also in your book. Common mistakes. This is really important. Forgetting to declare a variable. So if I say miles equals 61 versus var miles equals 61. Now, the nice thing is your text editor will kind of help you out with that. If you say x equals 2. Maybe it won't help you out with that. But what can help you out with that is if you copy your path. Well, we already copied that path. Come over here. If I hit refresh. Oh, it didn't actually do it yet. But if I tried to use that variable, it wouldn't let me do it because it hasn't been declared, and it can cause lots of issues. So anytime you're declaring a new variable, you'll always use the var keyword, and then after that, you don't declare it again. So like this example right here, let me present real quick. Var total equals 175. If I wanted to modify total again, I wouldn't say var again. I'm only ever going to declare a variable once. Forgetting quotes around text. This is huge because if I say var name equals Nathan, what it's going to look for is a variable called Nathan. It's not going to say, oh, your name is Nathan. It's going to look for a variable called Nathan. If it's not in quotes and I try to run this, hit refresh, notice this big red line right here. It says Nathan is not defined because I haven't defined a variable called Nathan. So that's a really common mistake. Using parentheses for multiplication. Okay, we're just used to this from algebra, which is why it's a common mistake. But if I wanted to multiply x and y by 3, I would have to explicitly put in that asterisk to say that I wanted that to multiply. Using a caret for exponentation, that doesn't work, even though it would work in algebra. Instead, there's a function called math.pow, which allows us to have any number. I could say like 5, and then comma, and then an exponent. And so if I wanted to say we have var x equals 2, and then var x squared would be math.pow x to the power of 2. Okay, and so that's how we do exponentation. All right, if I wanted to cube it, I could just say x to the 3rd or x to the 4th, and then I could assign that to any variable that I want to. Forgetting to convert parse text to a number. So if I try to do arithmetic with a string, it will not work. One really common mistake is, let's say I have the user types in a number and we get it from an input box, then it's going to be a string. Okay, just like we saw, we typed in 6 into our input box in the browser a second ago, and it comes back as a string. Well, if I say I want to add 2 years to somebody's age, and I say alert age plus 2, watch what happens. I'm going to come back over here to the browser, hit F5, 62. 6 plus 2 should be 8, not 62. But it saw this as string concatenation because I have a string here of 6, and so instead of doing arithmetic, it's saying, oh, okay, yeah, I can append 2 onto 6, and that's what happened. Whereas if I say age equals float age, then we'll convert it to a float, and then let's see what happens. Oh, whoops. That's my error here. Float is not defined. All right, this is embarrassing. I keep on switching between programming languages. So JavaScript, oh, it's parse float. So parse, I think it's capital F. Let's see. hit F5, and see now it says 8. Okay, it was able to take that number 6 in a string, convert it to a number, and then it could do that arithmetic. So that's what parse float does. It allows us to do arithmetic with numbers that were once strings, which would be anytime you have an input box. Okay. All right. So that is it for that. Okay. Any questions on chapter 5? That's pretty much everything that was in there, even though we just flew through it. But I wanted a couple minutes to look at your exam real quick. Okay. All right. So for your exam, please go to this document. So, is it going to let me do that? Copy link address. So there's a practice exam and a key. For you to get the most out of it, I would recommend you taking the practice exam without looking at the key, and then using the key to kind of check your answers. It's not letting me use this. So I had to download it. I don't know why. So it is from our first 5 weeks. So back to week 1, parts of a computer, what do they do? How do you write an HTML comment? Okay. With questions like this, just do your best. Sometimes an autograder will give you a wrong answer, even if you feel like you got a right answer. And if that happens, just send me a message to me or one of our TAs to go and fix that. But a comment in HTML, it'll just be this. Okay, we have the lesser than, exclamation mark, dash, dash, and then it ends with this. And so you could put anything in here. You could probably just leave it blank for your answer on your test. What meta tag do we normally use in our HTML? Go ahead and just look in the book at our examples of ones that we've done. Write the tag and closing tag that's run an HTML document. Again, just look at one of the programs that you've done. If I look at like my template that I made, and I just look at the top, I'm like, okay, what's the first tag in here? What's the last closing tag in here? Okay, it's our HTML tag that starts and ends a document. What is the tag that ends the body of an HTML document? We just looked at that right here. Write the HTML for a button to invoke the function call answer. Okay, so we have a couple of different things here. I would need a button, an HTML button, and then I might have some text in here that will actually show for the user. But then to call a function, I would have to say onClick and then find answer. And that'll call our function find answer. Okay, and so that's how I'd write a button to call that function. What is the ID attribute used for? It is to uniquely identify an attribute. Okay. What does the JavaScript function parse float do? You should all know that now. Okay. Where was that? Okay. Convert a string to a number. That's all it does. What value does the variable thing have after this? Okay, so we have var animal equals 5, var thing equals this space 5. All right, and so for your answer, you would just type in this space 5, just like that. Exactly how that string would be. What value will result have? Okay, now here are my tips, you guys. This is like the most important thing I'm going to say today about your exam. All this stuff you can find in the book, everything that I just said, which is why it's not super important. This, however, is something that is just a practical tip that I will give you for your exam. In any tab, hit F12, open up your developer tools, go to the console, and say var a equals 3, b equals 6, c equals -7. Our result equals a, you guys see where I'm going with this, equals b times 5 plus c. And then if I just say like alert result, it says -34. Okay, or even if I just type in result right here, -34. All right, now you're like, man, that's like cheating. That like shows the answer right there. Well, if you can use these developer tools, if you can come out of this class knowing how to use these developer tools, I will be so happy. Okay, I would rather you know how to use these developer tools and know how to like run JavaScript and check it than know how to do math in your head or even with a calculator on your desktop. Okay, this is a programming class and I want you to be able to use the tools that you have. And so anytime I have arithmetic like this, I'm not just gonna like trust my gut on it. Okay, I'm gonna run it. Just like I said earlier, I'm like, okay, I have my Fahrenheit value. Let's go check it in Google. Make sure that I'm right. All right. Now you can't check Google on your test, but you can use your developer tools on your test. So check it. Translate the following expression into JavaScript. We looked at one of these earlier. Let's just write this real quick. Okay, let's see. So that is a capital X. So I'll say var capital X equals, and then I'll do my denominator first, or sorry, my numerator first. A times B divided by, and then I'll put these into parentheses as well. And then this whole thing I'm going to put into parentheses for that fraction, and then times E once all that's done. Okay, so did I need this A times B in parentheses technically? No, but I choose to make it really clear where my numerator is, where my denominator is. Did I need these parentheses? No, because of order of operations, this division will take place before this multiplication. But I always like to put my my numerator in parentheses when there's multiple things going on, and denominator, and my whole fraction, just to be sure. It's just a habit that I'm in. Rewrite the following statement so it uses the times equals operator. Okay, so we have scale equals scale times growth. I would just say scale times equals growth. And that'll do that exact same thing. Let's see, rewrite the following JavaScript statement without using the auto increment operator. Okay, so we have plus plus G, that just adds 1 to G. So I would say G equals G plus 1. Or you could say G plus equals 1. They both do the same thing. All right, write a defining table for a program that calculates an employee's after-tax pay. So let's start up a defining table. I just have a JavaScript comment. I'll make it a multi-line comment, just so I don't have to have a bunch of forward slashes on every line. I'll have an input, processing, and an output. It just said our after-tax pay will be our output. Inputs include employees, regular hours worked, overtime, and wage. Say hourly wage. And then our processing. Okay. Let's see here. I would do hours worked times wage. Might have a few other things in here. I'd say overtime times overtime hours are paid at 1.5 times the regular hourly wage. So I'd say overtime times 1.5 times wage. And then employees' income tax at 18%. So I'd say total times 0.82. Okay, we could do it 2 ways. I could say times 0.82, and that'll give me the total pay after taking off 18%. Or I could say, pretty sure I could say divided by 0.18. Okay, I usually go like that. I don't know why, but it leaves me with that total left over. Okay, so I would put that in here as my processing. You could verbally write this, using the word times instead of an asterisk, whatever works for you. But this is my defining table for this. All right, and then it says write a JavaScript program to solve the problem from number 19. So I'm going to copy this. You'll be able to do this on your test as well. I'm going to make a new file, paste it, hit save, and I'm going to call this exam1.html. Okay, and so we already have our HTML here, which is really nice. We even have an output div, which is really nice. So all I have to do is grab my defining table and put it in here. All right, and then I'm going to make a function. And it looks like I don't have a button. Look at that. Okay, so I'm going to put a button right here. I'll say calculate. And then right here, I'll just say on click, compute pay. I'll copy that, so I'll make sure that it's the same name up here. I'll say function, compute pay. All right, now I have to get each one of these. So here's a cool little trick. If I highlight this ID and hit Control D, it'll select all 3 of them. And then I'm going to hit Control Shift right arrow to select all those at once and copy them. And then in here, I'll just paste them all at once. Hit Control Shift L to make a cursor on each one of those lines. And I'll say var, declare that, copy those again just for good measure, equals document dot get element by ID, that same ID, dot value. Okay, and so I just declared 3 variables. These could be named anything. I left these names just because it made it easy to copy and paste, but you could call these anything that you want. One thing that I will change on each one of these, I'm just going to hit Control and click on each one of these to get cursors, is parse float. Okay, because now I'll be dealing with numbers instead of strings that I can do math with. Okay, so here is my input. My output is going to be with this output div. So I'm going to say document dot get element by ID or output dot inner HTML equals, and I'll just say total. This is a variable that I have not declared yet. So right here, let's go ahead and do our processing. All right, I'm just going to look up here at my defining table. If you have a good defining table, this should help you. Okay, so I'm going to take hours worked times wage. So I'll just say regular hours. Whoa, regular hours times hourly wage. All right, that's our first thing. I'm just going to leave that there for a sec. And then overtime hours times 1.5 times hourly wage. Okay, I have both of those. Now this won't work if I tried to run this because I'm just like doing this multiplication, but I don't have variables assigned. I'm just like throwing my logic out here on the page and then I'll put it all together. And then I'm going to take all that and times it by 0.82. So what I'm going to do, I have a lot of multiplication right here. So I'm just going to put this into parentheses, delete that, and I'll say plus, and then I'll put this into parentheses. Okay, so I have regular hourly wage and regular hours, and then overtime pay that we have there. And the only thing that I have to add is just our tax here. And so if I wanted to say times 0.82, then I would have to put all of this into parentheses. Okay, otherwise I would only tax my overtime hours and then add my hourly wage on top. Okay, and then all this, I'm just going to say var total equals that, and then I'll output that total. Okay, so I'm going to copy this path and run it in the browser. Okay, so if I worked 10 hours and I had 1 overtime hour, so it'd be 15 bucks, hopefully if my hourly wage is $10. If I calculate that, it says it's 94.3. So this should be $100 for the regular pay, and then plus 15, so 115, and then I could check in a calculator to see if 115 times 0.82 ends up at that number that I want, and I would encourage you to check it. Okay, I used really simple numbers right here because I'm not super good at math, but I used simple numbers right here so that I could do the math and check it myself. Then I could use more complex numbers and stuff and see what that would look like. Okay, well, you guys, I feel bad. We're 2 minutes over. There is more in this exam. There are 2 more questions that I would love to go through with you guys. And I'd also love to like look at some of the questions, some of the programming exercises at the end of your book. So Wednesday morning, I'm going to do a little study session. It'll be an hour long. If people come, if people don't come, I'll just close it. But it is at 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay. I had time later on in the day and earlier in the day, but I'm trying to just find a time that works for more people. And I know there are a lot of people that can't come at this regular 11:30 time. So 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, I'll be doing more of this and answering any questions. But yeah, so any questions though before I let you guys go?
Brother Barch.
Yeah, go ahead, Yuri.
So on the week 5, there is a quiz chapter 5 review part B.
Yeah.
And I cannot get the right answers. And do you post right answers somewhere so I can?
Yeah, that's a great idea. You can expect that by the end of today. I'll post
Okay.
it.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
As far as exams and assignments go, do you want us to use the var keyword instead of the let keyword?
You can use whatever you want.
Okay.
I'm fine. Yeah. There isn't too much of a difference in those until you get into heavier JavaScript, which we don't do in this class. And so for the purposes of this class, either are fine.
Okay.
Both are fine. Okay. All right. See you guys. Thanks for coming, listening to me ramble. Any questions you guys have, just post on the help channel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Brother Birch. Very helpful.
Thanks, Rich. See ya.